Making AI Count, Real-World Answers for Global Logistics, presented by Journal of Commerce by S&P Global in partnership with Raft. I'm Alessandra Barrett, Associate Director of Special Projects at the Journal of Commerce by S&P Global, and I'll be your moderator for our discussion with Adam Hill, Chief Executive Officer of Scarborough Global, and Nisarg Mehta, Chief Technology Officer of Raft. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes for housekeeping. I think most of you know all of this, but just in case, everything you need to navigate the webcast can be found at the bottom of the console by the widgets listed. Just click on any of those. You'll find directions for submitting questions, downloading presentations, reviewing speaker bios. I must make a plug, and I will a couple more times throughout the show. Please submit your questions for our speakers. Now, as ideas strike you as we're going through the conversation, we really do want this to be a webcast that helps you find the answers that you need to do your business. So pretty simple, type your question into the Ask a Question area and then just click Submit. At the end of the program, we'll pop up a very short survey. And I do mean it when I say that we look at that feedback right after any presentation, and we do factor that in when we're creating our content calendar for the upcoming year. So again, we want to produce content at the Journal of Commerce that is resonating with our readers and our audience. So please just take a couple minutes to let us know what you thought of this presentation or this webcast. That is also located in the resource widget or via the resource widget on the webcast console if you want to go to that early. The goal of today's webcast is an active discussion around the current and real impact that artificial intelligence is having on global logistics operations as we close out 2024. So we're going to dive into what comes next, and we're going to hopefully provide some good insight from those who are inside a transformation and have been for the last few years. We do have a few slides to make it easier to note some stats or for a quick visual, but primarily we're just going to move through some points of discussion and then turn it to you, our audience. So again, put those questions in the chat. We'll have about 15 minutes at the end to go through those. Adam, I'm going to turn it to you first. Could you start us off with a bit about your backgrounds and the work that Scarborough has been doing around this topic?
Sure. Thanks for the invite. I look forward to joining the group here. So my name is Adam Hill. I'm President and Chief Executive Officer of Scarborough Global. And, we've been on an AI journey since probably 2020 and maybe late 2019, early 2020, when Nisarg and I first met, and have really had an interesting last few years as we've seen the benefits. We've seen some of the downfalls. We've seen all of the iterations as we've continued to work through this process. And I'm excited to sit here with Nisarg and talk through really our journey over the last handful of years and talk through our kind of the iterations that we've really taken over the next, the last 4 years, and where we really think this is going over the next, I don't know, probably 2 years at least inside of our own shop.
Nisarg, you're also Raft's co-founder. I didn't mention that in our intro. So by way of introduction, what role do you see the company playing at this transitional moment in the industry?
Yeah, firstly, hi everyone, I'm Nisarg. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Raft. I've spent my entire career so far just looking at AI, so really happy to discuss some of that with Adam and share that with the group more broadly. And we've been working with AI from very, very early on, and we've seen, as Adam has, from our side, building the technology, deploying the technology, what works well, what doesn't. We've done this at like a really large scale. So really happy to be here and share some of what we've seen. As a 2-sentence overview for who we are, at Raft, we're the largest AI-powered platform for supply chain and specifically freight forwarding right now. We process or help our customers process their shipments in one platform at scale using automation and AI in various different ways, with a specific focus on accounts payable, invoices, and finance functions, and many, many different things to do with customs.
Great. Now we are going to start with a high aerial view, but first I'd like to get a little bit of a pulse on our audience and where they are in their AI journey. So we do have a slide that's going to walk us through a first poll question. So let me just a minute. There we go. So is AI an innovation priority for your organization's IT department for 2025? Please pick one. Yes, no, or not applicable. I don't have an IT department. Or frankly, applicable in any other reason. That would be fine. Any thoughts on what we might see in this, in response to this? Nisarg, what do you typically see? What are you seeing these days?
I'd be surprised if the vast majority don't have something or the other to do with AI. So my prediction would be pretty heavily skewed to the yeses for this.
I would agree with Nisarg.
Controversial question.
Yeah.
Right. Let's see what we have. Okay. And then I just want to jump quickly to the next poll. How would you rate AI's potential for driving digital transformation for logistics? This is another one with just one choice or one selection. The potential is significant, it's too soon to tell, or it's all hype and won't have any impact.
We need a secret answer D here that says all of the above.
That's probably what I'd vote for. If we had an option D, that would be my vote.
I definitely want to dig in later to the question of how much of it or how you separate hype from the reality of the actual potential that we have here. All right, that was a short one, so let's see what the results are. Okay. So thank you, audience, for letting us know where you are on this. Let's, before I jump in, any surprises? Doesn't seem like there was. Any thoughts on anything that might be driving these numbers? Or shall we just dive into the 3,000 level view, 30,000?
No, the only thing I'd say is we've discussed this with our customers and partners a bunch of times over the years, and every year or every time we do this, we've seen the shift towards technological adoption and AI become heavier and heavier in people's perceptions. So that trend kind of continues in these answers. So that's always good to see.
Nisarg, how do you break AI and machine learning down? How you speak about this topic a lot to people who are new to it, trying to find their way. How do you demystify it?
Yeah, so maybe I'll discuss something just in general terms about AI, and then touch a little bit about the supply chain specific applications of it. But AI has been around for a really, really long time, like much longer than people think it has. It just wasn't particularly effective for the vast majority of the years that people were doing research in that in universities around the world. And it sort of really became mainstream around 10 years ago or so, when there were some big leaps in what was possible with it. And obviously we're in the middle now of another pretty generational leap in what the technology can do. So in that sense, I like to break it down into what happened about a decade ago and what's happening now. And fundamentally, about a decade ago, it became possible to solve problems that were quite unstructured, that humans could do well, but machines could not, unless they had very specific parameters that were given to it. But it wasn't still at a point where it could generalize beyond what it was designed for. And that's the more traditional machine learning models. You can sort of think of Google Translate or something where you click a picture of something on your phone and your phone can identify this is a chair, this is a table, that sort of thing. Whereas now, obviously, we're in the middle of something that's way more generalizable. It's not perfect by any means, but the potential is significantly larger because it's not constrained in the way that it was. And I think it will open up solutions to things that people have traditionally always thought of as impossible, because you're too used to seeing something be done a particular way, and you cannot fathom a different way of doing it. And technology, up until very recently, wasn't at a point where it could actually solve it. So you'd be right in many of those cases. But finally, for the past couple of years, we're at a point where you can make meaningful, significant impact if you deploy AI correctly, if users adopt it correctly, and you'll see pretty transformational sort of effects of that.
Adam, Scarborough stepped into AI. They adopted it early on. What made it click on your side? And sort of part B, how did you overcome the questions around trust and value?
So what made it click for us was, frankly, just sitting down and talking to Nisarg, right? Like, let's not downplay that idea. And I say that because AI feels a little bit like Star Trek. Right? It's so future leaning. You almost can't understand it until you can sit down and with someone who understands it at such a level that it becomes simple. And so for us, really, the click was AI is another tool in our toolbox. It is not the answer to world hunger. And I say that because it's truly something for us that we all look for to provide, like, this magic bullet idea. And it's not that piece of the puzzle. And I think that once you're able to get your head wrapped around that and understand that it's just another tool in the toolbox, things start to click, and they click really quickly. And with that, as we've kind of gone in, there is the idea that you brought up of, do you trust the tech, right? We all hear about AI that hallucinates, or we hear about those types of things. And I mean, Apple was just in the news the other day with an issue that it, with the BBC on something that its AI pulled off that wasn't exactly correct. And so I think that when people see those things, it scares them off quickly. And those things, the tool, the process, the tech is very much in this iterative phase that says, as things move forward, things are going to get better. Sometimes we'll take a step back, and then maybe we'll take 3 or 4 steps forward. And I think that people need to truly understand that that is what this looks like. And so when you talk about the value and you talk about where did the rest of this come in, for me, in our company, logistics at its core is a people business. It is a relationship business, and especially from the service provider side. And moving that container from A to B, as an example, isn't an overly complex concept, but it's the value that the team adds and the people add to that conversation that then turns around into a scenario where AI provides massive amounts of value, because now I am no longer paying my people for their fingers and to key something in. I'm paying them for their brains and their ability to help solve a problem and build a relationship with a customer. And that, for me, is where the value comes in. And I think there is a flip side to this. And I think people are going to look at this to say, how much can I cut cost? And I do think that model exists. That's not a model we are interested in here. But I do think at a high level, that model probably does exist. And people are saying, wow, I can do this. And maybe it's not much about cutting costs, but how do you prevent the next hire or the next 5 hires? And we can obviously talk through our journey as we get farther into this. But I think from us, the value is around using it as a tool to allow our people to build relationships with their client base, not using it as a tool to replace jobs.
And I think that there's a lot that we would still like to talk about as regarding the human element of AI adaptation. But so we have a slide up that focuses on challenges, and it highlights unstructured data among other issues. Nisarg, what are the challenges that you're hearing most?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, this should be a surprise to no one that everything in the modern world, while technology has moved forward like leaps and bounds, because of the global, relatively fragmented nature of supply chain and how information is at the core of it, and everyone needs to translate information from one system to another, from one company to another. Everything is run on spreadsheets, emails, documents. It hasn't really benefited from significant advances in technology today. So when we work with our customers, big, small, regional, multinational, sort of fundamentally at the core of it is people are spending time, as Adam said, just keying stuff in from one system to another, either from one spreadsheet to another, from a document to a spreadsheet, from a document to an email, or an email to the TMS or ERP system. So the time that people are spending is on relatively trivial, low value add, not strategic tasks as a result of the information being both unstructured but also communicated in ways that are not as digitally friendly. And I often like to think of it as many of the processes that exist now are still kind of analog. I mean, just because it's in an email doesn't mean it's digital. It's better than printing it out and sending it around like the office, but it's still fundamentally analog because you can't do anything with the information that's in there. And that's sort of a large bottleneck to taking a couple of meaningful steps forward in supply chains running more effectively. So that's sort of the universe of things we see with our customers, regardless of size and shape. And I'm sure this is not really a major surprise to anyone that's worked in the field.
Adam, what are your thoughts on starting here?
You know, Nisarg hit the nail on the head. Anyone that works in logistics has inbox that overflow with PDFs and spreadsheets and quick updates here and vessel delay there. Oh, the rate updated here, the fuel surcharge updated there, right? And it's just this constant information flow that is 100% unstructured, especially when you think that the only structure is that it lives inside your email inbox. And there is so much data in there that you can access and use. It just, how do you get it? And I think that's the idea here, and getting us to a spot where, I mean, I think that Nisarg hit the nail on the head. There's just so much out there, right? There's so much. It's not a surprise. Everyone on this call, I guarantee you, has sat in that chair and said, I got 300 emails overnight last night with 247 updates, and the other 53 emails are duplicates, triplicates of what someone else sent me. And what do I actually need to do? How do I walk in this morning and do my job? And I think that idea is where AI starts to really play a part in this conversation.
And when you've already sort of taken that first step, like what does phase 3 and 4 look like?
Yeah, so go ahead, Nisarg.
So I'll quickly jump in. So I'd say like using my analogy of everything still being analog, I think it's the first time that technology is at a place where there is an opportunity to translate it from analog to digital. And by digital, I mean truly digital, where it becomes something that you can build on top of. You can generate insights, you can make like prioritization easier. Everything that you wish you wanted to do is sort of now in the realm of possibility. It isn't trivial to do by any means, but now you can sort of see a pathway to it existing, whereas before there wasn't a practical sort of pathway to that. So I'll pause there. I know, Adam, you wanted to jump in, and then I can cover off some other points after.
I mean, I think the slide hits it perfectly. We're able to now use data that previously was in someone's head, and now it is in a place that, from a technology perspective, we can call it, we can surface it, we can use it to provide insight to other team members, to customers. And I think that's where this is where the AI black box is so perfectly described here is really what this next phase is truly about.
Yeah, I love this graphic because we could spend an entire hour just on the potential or the what's next or the challenges. But this piece, this middle, is fundamental to any conversation. So, Adam, let's start with you on this. Can you speak to the work that's required for AI adoption to adapt to how an individual company operates?
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. And we have tried a few different ways because getting involved in this type of conversation with our employees requires trust from them to us, number one, right? Making sure that this isn't about replacing the human element. And then two, trusting the tech. And so for us, it's been where could we get the quick wins? And we started in one area and we actually quickly moved to another because we found we were able to get wins faster within our finance department. So we quickly shifted and said, this team is excited. And I think that's the other part of this is these first adopters have to be very excited about the potential of AI because it's going to be lumpy. It's going to be progress setback as the data continues to get better. And I mean, I think we've all heard garbage in, garbage out, and AI is really not much different than that. As we provide it poor data, it's going to produce poor data back out. Or as it's trying to look at the data and when I say poor data, I'm also talking about internal data. We don't have data in a consistent flow inside of our organization to provide information for AI to do its job, right? Because some of that data is maybe living in someone's head and they know, well, it says this on the screen, but it really means that. And I think we all have instances like that where you get a sheet from someone that says, here's the process, but then there's the secret few things that no one ever puts in the process, right? It's like when my grandma gave me a recipe and left out the key element. So you always wanted to go back to grandma's house for more because there was that one secret ingredient. And I feel like what this is that exact same idea that we can't have that secret ingredient because it needs to see it all to process it all. And so for us, as we made this shift, our finance team was very much in the mindset of things needed to be ordered, things needed to be structured. And because of their just general appetite and insight into what makes their world tick, right? They live in Excel. They want their Excel sheets to work well. They want their pivot tables to work well. So that same idea flows really well into this conversation for us. And I think that for us is where we kind of saw the first big kickstart within our organization. And we're starting to get some others, but for us, the finance team is what really drove a lot of new adoption within our organization operationally, rather than our operations kind of driving finance, which I know finance isn't always known to be the leader in new tech. But I think for us, it was really fun to watch as they were getting excited about the possibilities of, wow, this is going to help me do X, Y, and Z. So now I can go do 1, 2, and 3. And I think that's where the light bulbs clicked for them, and they all really got excited and have spent a lot of time and energy making the system and making the tech work for them.
It reminds me, Nisarg, of something, and I'm probably going to paraphrase it poorly, perhaps. It's something that you've said before, which is essentially that that's being specific. The specificity is what can balance the hype. You don't get around AI hype until you get very specific about what problems you need to solve, who within your organization is best equipped, most passionate, ready to jump in, and then what you're actually going to be solving for. Can you speak to that, to what Adam said and some of what we have on the slide here?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's two things that are important, like in separating it out from the hype. One is obviously the specificity of what you can use it for. And the second is doing it at scale versus doing a demo. I think we've all seen like fantastic presentations by Microsoft and Google where they call a phone and like magical things happen and they have their like restaurant booked. that's fantastic. In a demo, I'm sure some of it will probably even happen in reality. But if you were to do the same thing 10,000 times a day, every single week of the month, every single month of the year, even small issues or small things that don't quite work perfectly make significant differences in how you think about it, how you use it, how you adopt it. So in separating out hype from reality, I think the specificity is one, and then the other is thinking about how it works at scale. And how it works at scale is a fundamentally different problem to how can I show that it is cool. Showing it is cool is the easiest thing ever now with what LLMs and generative AI can do, but making it work at the sort of really macro scale is what makes it possible to move past the hype and into real ROI, real impact. And then switching into the specifics of how it should be implemented, I think Adam can speak a lot better to this than I can. But at a very high level, across our customer base and across projects we've done, we found that AI is no different really to how you'd approach a new project or a new implementation, in the sense that you need people to be on board, you need processes to work well with it, and then you need the technology and the platform and the product to work. So the fundamental principles of using AI are the same as using or changing to the latest version of Outlook or the newest Microsoft suite or whatever that is. Where it's different is it's not the same as upgrading from one version of Outlook to another, because now there is a completely different surface area of problems that you can solve. It's not a traditional upgrade. It can now do fundamentally different things, and it operates often in fundamentally different ways. And people need to sort of wrap their head around some of that some of the principles are the same, but there are notable differences that take a little bit of time to sort of get used to, and get people in the right mindset. And something that I think we've done particularly well, because we've been mindful of it from the start, is not treating AI as a black box. I know there's a black box on the slide before, but it isn't. No one would work with us if that was the case. The way in which we make it easier for people to use AI is by wrapping it in a way that is digestible for them. And I think Adam says this, so I will steal this from Adam, is you need to go and meet the user where they are. You can't just say, here's a fantastic system, go use it. You have to limit the number of steps that they need to take and go meet them where they are so that they can use it. And the deployment of AI into that is something that I think we've been very mindful of from the start.
I think the other thing that you hit on, Nisarg, is that, and I think this is where probably a lot of people struggle, I know we did, is we have a process A, B, C, D, and that might work in our current environment, but to integrate the technology in, the process maybe needs to go A, C, B, D. And it has no real impact to what we're looking at the end of the day, but that's where we need the tech to play its role. And sometimes it's hard to get out of, no, we do things 1, 2, 3, 4, when 1, 3, 2, 4 would still be okay. Because the start's where we started and we ended where we ended. And I think that for us was probably one of the hardest things for people, to going back to an early question around trusting the tech and saying that from a process perspective, well, if it doesn't fit exactly in my mold, then obviously it can't work for me. Or when they see something on TV and they see the Microsoft ad that magically everything works perfectly, that there is some marketing to that, but there's also some reality that you have to maybe look at your processes and how things change in order to integrate and implement the tech appropriately.
So, I don't think that any webcast about technology really can be useful until we sort of dig into the where to begin. And two areas in global logistics that are sort of maturing around or maturing in AI adoption would be AP invoices and customs. So can you speak to why starting there and sort of where we are in both of those areas? Nisarg, do you want to take this one first?
I was actually going to say, I think Adam might be better than me at this, given he's doing it from a real world perspective. And I'll let him start. And if there's something I can add, then I'll jump in.
So let's start with customs, because I think that's the one, as we moved through our journey, that's where we got probably the most excited. And AP is where we went first and fastest. So I can kind of talk through both parts of that. We got excited around customs because without some customers work fabulously with their IT departments, and we get data electronically through an actual EDI transmission or something like that, and our systems are connected. So let's now remove the 1% that does that, and the other 99% that still provides a PDF or an Excel sheet, or we do some work with some very remote wineries that still provide handwritten invoices. And so, and you look at that from a customs perspective, and one of the things that needs to happen is, I need to be able to get that information that is very unstructured in a way that is structured to present to U.S. Customs for any of our customer base. And so that, from just a pure excitement point, says, wow, there's a lot of work. And then if you break that down into humans make mistakes, I think it was on the previous slide, you get rid of the fat finger, right? We have all seen it. The commercial invoice says country of origin China on it, but we used this product in the past and it said Taiwan, and someone just keyed in Taiwan and kept moving. Or in that scenario, the invoice says Hong Kong, but the actual line says China. AI doesn't make that mistake because it doesn't have any preconceived notion about what the answer should be, right? It says, oh, I see the data. This is what I need to do with that data. And we move on. And so for us, it's helped look at how do we reduce fat finger? How do we reduce the manual error from a customs perspective? And then you look at a customer who provides commercial invoices that are 500, 600, 700 lines long that you're not directly connected with. And you have a 48-page PDF document that now needs to get entered so you can provide that to customs. So that is the type of stuff that can take you from 4 hours to 4 minutes. And the value that's created there is exponential. And so from a customs perspective, for us, it's around how do we get access to the data on those PDFs faster and, more importantly, more accurately. And I think that's the piece that we don't talk about a lot because humans do make mistakes. From an AP perspective, the idea really works well. There is an invoice that we think is supposed to be coming. If the invoice is provided, the system says, look, I said I owed you $100. I got my bill in for $100. It says it's from the right person for the right amount, for the right reference number, match and move on, right? There's no, from the perspective of the team and from the human, if everything's perfect, we don't need to spend our time looking at what everyone already did well. We need to spend our time making sure that we're catching the outliers, making sure we're catching the exception to the rule, not the stuff that just quickly flowing through. And that's why I think AP works well. And in any of us on the service provider side, from a volume perspective, if you do one customs entry and that has a delivery on top of it, there might be 5 AP invoices attached to that. So just from a pure volume game, one job in our system creates 2 to 4 times additional AP invoices on top of that. And that's why, just as Nisarg talks about scale and where we can provide value to our team is that piece of it, because as we grow, the AP function grows exponentially faster. And that is where AP really starts to play into this, from A, just a pure volume and scale standpoint, and then B, the ability for the tool to truly look and match and say, this all works, so I don't need a human to intervene.
Now, Adam, I should have, I should highlight that you are also a licensed customs broker, certified customs specialist, and your expertise is in international trade compliance. So before we get off of this slide, I just wanted to get your thoughts on new administration coming in, potential tariff changes, where do you see the potential for AI helping with a situation that's going to need to be very fluid?
And you nailed it. The situation is fluid. From that perspective, if you think about kind of the previous slides and the idea of taking unstructured data and getting it into a structured form, it's not about it's about that translation, that move to structured data to now access what do I need to know, what do I need to know quickly, right? If I have a customer that comes to me and says, I'm currently importing these items out of China, but they typically don't say it like that. They're like, what is my exposure? I get a phone call. What's my exposure from China if this happens? Well, I need to have data in a structured way that I can go quickly grab that information, because they probably don't in this scenario, which is why they're asking, right? So we have the ability to pull that data in a very structured way to say, here's your exposure, and get it to them in 10 minutes. And that's the kind of information, and that's the speed at which, as a service provider, we have to perform. And I think that where AI plays as a part of this is saying, what happens with all of that data that we're getting access to? And I think that's the most important piece of this. And back up 15 years, historically, on our side of the house, we were simply information gatherers, right? People provided us documentation. And over the last probably 10 years, fast forwarded extremely quickly throughout the pandemic, is we became very much information providers, and people look to us to gather additional information. So for us, how do we take all of this data that's coming in via email and put it in a structured way? And I think that's the piece of this that where AI plays. It's about getting the data to a point where now we can provide the rest of the insight to the customer, the human element, right? That says, hey, this is what we're seeing, and then we go from there.
I want to, that there's so much more that that we could talk about just even on that topic, but I'd like to dig into your experience. So one slide really just to focus on the case study element of this webcast. So can you dig in a little bit more and discuss your AP experience?
Sure. So to give you just the easiest way to describe it is that our company has grown 2.5 times over the last 5 years. So we're 2.5 times larger than we were at the beginning of 2019. And we have no additional finance staff. And I think that in and of itself tells the story, right? The numbers don't matter. That just idea tells the story. It's as simple as that. And so for us, as much as I know the slide says it was a reduction in spend, and really it was about a reduction in future spend and not current spend. Because the team didn't shrink. I didn't say we've done all of this, so now we have less, because at 2.5 more times, there's a lot more work to be done. So how do we use the technology to do more with less? And I hate to say it that way, but do more with less. And that's for us where the tool has really been highly impactful, because now the team is only focused on the ideas or the issues that come up that says, my vendor quoted me $1,000, sent me an invoice for $1,500. Where's the disconnect? And so now they're focused on the disconnect and making us more accurate in payment and reconciliation than just processing the bills that come through perfectly. And I think that's where we've seen it. So as we've grown 2.5 times more, we've also seen, as you see here, 75% of the invoices come through with no problem. So that's 75% less work that they're truly doing, but that 25% is much larger than it was. And the other thing to think about for all of you just in general, in theory, what that's saying is that there's 25% that was either wrong or there was a problem. So there's a lot out there that invoices aren't perfect, people aren't perfect. And so there's a lot of that still plays into this conversation. And even the ones that aren't, our ability to process them quickly is obviously down also significantly in that amount of time. But I think the overarching answer to this is we've grown 2.5 times and we have no new finance staff to help.
Nisarg, what are your thoughts on that as a metric? I think it's a pretty clear, it tells the story very well. When customers come to you, do you have any advice around identifying the right metric for them?
Yeah, I think we often work quite closely with them in identifying what makes sense, given our expertise in what the technology can do. It's not uncommon when we get into a conversation for customers to say, can we do this? Can we do that? Can we also do the third thing, the fourth thing? And the answer is, yeah, probably. You could do most of those things, but you should likely start here. And you should likely start here because the ROI is going to be high. The time for your people to learn how to use it is going to be low. You're going to get the biggest bang for your buck quickly. That'll help build up some momentum within the team. And then you can expand from there, building on that success, rather than trying to solve what might be like a ridiculously complicated thing, but it only happens once a month. Sure, it'll make life a little bit easier for that once a month situation, but it isn't really going to move the needle. And you want to find things that are going to move the needle. Slightly separately to this, purely on customs, we work with a few other customs brokers, and I think one of them commissioned a study to actually see the impact of fat fingers and how much better it gets with using platform or worse. And I think what they found was they had an 18% error rate when it was like done manually, which is slightly scary to think about, an 18% error rate in something like customs. And it went down to something like 2 or 3% when using technology. So it's a sort of hidden benefit that people don't really talk about, but Adam mentioned it, and I wanted to back that up with some numbers, even though they're not up on the slide here.
So let's dive into the future look. What does the next generation of AI look like? What does the next mass adoption wave look like? What will we be debating buzz versus real potential next year? I want to hear all your thoughts. Start wherever feels natural.
I can briefly start. So I think one of the things that the latest advances in AI have enabled is you can kind of go back to the drawing board and think about everything from square one. You can think about everything and ask the question, can this be done differently? Can this be done better? Whereas before, technology wasn't necessarily at a point where it could do that. So I think what we'll find as people get more familiar with it, as deployments become more mature, as we move past experiments that people did, past the hype cycle into, okay, this is what it's actually doing in the wild. There'll be a bunch of pretty big transformations in how people think about their business processes and some of their verticals, where it'll be like almost completely different to what they're doing today because of what the technology sort of unlocks. And the speed at which the technology is moving now means that there's constantly going to be more and more and more that it can do. So in a year from now, like if you think about where we were a year back, like this time last year, I think there's been that much of an update in what these models could do in this year than there was in like a few years cumulatively before that. And we're getting to the point where improvements are not going to be that drastic for forever, but it's still going to move like really fast for a while.
Now we have a poll up to get our audience feedback on looking ahead for 5 years. Which of the following intrigues you the most? Each answer is a bit lengthy, so I'm going to give everyone time to read through it, give us some answers. I will also, though, because I'm watching the clock, ask Adam to give his thoughts on what's next in the future of AI. And I will remind everyone that this whole webcast will be available on demand within 24 hours, or probably less. So if you miss anything because you're reading these questions, you can catch up in a little bit.
I think the future holds more mass adoption, because I think we are going from a place where the technology was scary and it's becoming much more mainstream. I mean, we see Apple, we see Google, we see Microsoft rolling this out in everyone's daily life. And I think as more and more and more of that happens, you get more mass adoption. And as you get mass adoption, in theory, the tech becomes hopefully better and the model learns better because there's more good inputs going in, and therefore there are more good inputs coming out. And so for me, over the next year, this is all about seeing the rest of the world continue to catch up. The rest of the mass adoption is really, the cycle is starting. And I think Nisarg nailed it. There is a hype cycle that goes with this. And every time Apple releases this new or Microsoft releases that new, you get some uptick. But as enterprises, I think they're typically slower rather than us as individuals. But I think there is so much coming that you're starting to see more and more and more organizations adopt at some level. And they might just be dipping their toe in the water, but really what I think the future around this is about mass adoption over the next few years. And I think you're just going to continue to see more and more and more of it.
Great. Let's see what the results are on our poll. Interesting how it splits out. What are your thoughts, both of you? Let's start with Nisarg.
Yeah, I think everything is like relatively even in the distribution, and I'm not entirely surprised that no one thinks that AI is going to be the next user interface, because that is probably quite difficult to do. So that is not surprising. But everything else is sort of evenly split, and I agree. They're all very, very valid, very achievable outcomes of AI, and the sort of evenness of the percentages for each of those sort of shows that people agree with that generally as well.
Any thoughts, Adam, before we turn to
yeah, it's doing a lot of these things already, right? So this is being evenly split is kind of like the secret answer D earlier, right? It's doing a lot of these types of things. So this makes 100% sense to me. And I give Nisarg a hard time often when I'm like, well, Nisarg, I think I can figure this out in Excel. Like, I think the tech should be able to do it. And I don't think I could figure out in Excel how to become the next generation user interface. So I think him and I are spot on the same answer there.
Great. Just to let everyone know, any questions that we don't get to live, we will respond to via email. So please keep the questions, keep submitting them. First one up, Nisarg, how do you see people and the workforce needing to change? For example, people, education, and training, not just on industry specifics, but AI skills.
Yeah, so I think it's a crucial part of a successful project and a successful implementation. You have to take people along the journey, otherwise it has no hope in hell of working well. But it isn't really about training them on AI per se. It's much more on training them or opening their mind up to what's now possible with the new technology and how to think about work a little bit differently. It isn't really important for them to know what Google's model can do versus what Microsoft's model can do and how to use it. It's much more important for them to generally understand that work is going to change in some ways. Processes are probably going to adapt in some ways. And how can I sort of keep up with that adaptation? And that's sort of where the training and taking people along the journey comes in. So it's not really training people on AI, but it's more training them on what's possible and how can I make the most of it. And something that comes sort of hand in hand with that is everyone always wants to balance the automation potential versus governance ability. You don't want to go too far on either end of that. You want to be able to audit and look at the governance of these processes. But you also want automation. You don't want everyone checking everything, otherwise it sort of defeats the purpose. And people understanding where on that balance they are makes a big difference towards them trusting it and then understanding that they can change and adapt because they're still going to have the governance aspect. So they don't have to worry that something like terrible is going to happen because they're now doing it differently.
Adam, how has Scarborough handled personal biases regarding AI?
I think that's a great question, because early on, I think there's always the fear. You're just getting the tech up and running. They're going to let me help train it, and then my job's gone. And I think that from at least that perspective, from our staff, we've seen that, but we've also seen it transition to say, wow, life is becoming simpler and those types of things. So I think from, their bias towards the tech has changed over the last 4 years, and changed as we've continued to move through our own journey with AI. And now as new things come on board, it's fun to see how quickly groups will try to adopt to a new thing, because they're not afraid of what does it mean for me as an individual. They're like, wow, what can this let me do more of or do less of, depending on kind of where they like something or don't like something. And it's been, I liken that start 4 or 5 years ago as we've started this journey. And now we're to a point where, we're almost having to slow a team down. Like, wait a minute, that makes sense, but maybe we need to look at it in a bigger picture. And that was not the case 4 years ago. And so I think you've seen for us a big shift in the team, and the idea that, wow, this tool can actually, and not just, and I say tool, just AI in general, can maybe make my life better. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the bias kind of shift and drop.
With regard to data, how do you envision AI's ability to enhance the data used for an international commercial invoice, specifically with regard to product descriptions in support of accurate classification for customs?
I don't think I'm qualified to fully answer that, so I'll let Adam take that.
Will you say that one more time for me to make sure I caught all of the asks?
Yep. With regard to data, how do you envision AI's ability to enhance the data used for an international commercial invoice, specifically with regard to product descriptions in support of accurate classification for customs?
I mean, that's a broad question. And I think where there is, as we look at an invoice, and we've all seen it, and, the description on the invoice says body. And you're like, well, what is it? Is the body of a pen? Is it part of a car? Is it part of this? Is it part of that? And the list just goes on and on. And so I think from that perspective, there is something to be said. But I think that this is more of a commercial conversation almost between you and your vendors about how to get that data better, not a tool to say, well, every time you change the invoice to say this. And that kind of speaks back to my prior comment of that information that you just know in your head. And so I think this is a larger, maybe even more commercial conversation, rather than it is truly a tech and how does it fix my problem that I can't get my vendor to fix. And I know that that's typically where this comes from, but it can only do so much. And I'd be kind of curious, Nassar, your thoughts as it sees the same thing over and over again, that obviously there is some things that tech can do, but I think at the beginning, this is almost about additional user input to help the model learn what that secret in your head is.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from my perspective, it's not really that AI is going to tell you that XYZ body should be this HTS code, but it's probably going to be much better at looking at the entire HTS chapter in US Customs or whichever customs authority around the world and say, here's your 5 best matches from the literature as to theoretically this is what it should be. Here's the 3 things you've done in the past 2 months. Which of these do you want to do? So it narrows down sort of your scope, makes recommendations, and then when you say, no, I think it should be this for this use case and it should be that for that use case, it then goes into updating how it should interpret that the next time, when instead of those 8 options, it's now only going to give you 3. And then it's going to become even like narrowed down more and more. It's like, okay, now I know for sure it's going to be this.
Much of your discussion compares manual fat finger with AI, which is an unfair comparison. Could you instead distinguish between more traditional automation and computing and AI? And then the second part of the question is, what's the, wait, I lost it. What's the value add of AI over big data and operations research?
Yeah, so I can briefly take that, and it's a very interesting question, because the comparison between doing everything completely manually to doing everything like semi-automatically or structured automatically, like RPA is, where you need to say, do this, then do that, then do a 4th thing, to AI, which is way more flexible. You don't need to, it's not brittle. It's not sort of set up to do exactly this recipe. It's not based on heuristics that need to be built and maintained. It essentially means that you can solve much more complicated problems than you could before. So traditionally, what RPA could do is very limited in scope. And if anything in that system changes, you need to go and rebuild and maintain your sort of RPA bots. AI takes a lot of that away, because it can inherently deal with change. It can inherently deal with flexibility. It can inherently deal with like a lot that traditional approaches, operational research, statistical learning, RPA, there's lots of different things that people have tried to make life here easier, but they always have some restriction or limitation or the other that means that it's not really that much better in a big picture macro scale. Whereas because of the flexibility inherent in AI, it allows you to do much more. I didn't cover everything there, but given time, I'll stop there.
There's so many good questions coming in. While we talk about AI and machine learning, can you discuss the ROI of the implementation and how ROI is realized? Reduced FTE, lower overpayment, increased revenue from accessorials. Is the investment in AI machine learning cash flow positive?
It's a great question. And from our perspective, we do, I think, obviously we've been here for 4 years. So year 1, was it cash flow positive? No, it wasn't. But that's not, but we were really early. I think today, with where the tool is, where you get some of that ROI is also in costs that maybe you don't see. And I know that is not what everyone out here wants, to build a business case and put it all on a sheet in their Excel sheet or whatever their form for their company is, and say, I'm going to get this much back, or it's going to pay back this quickly. And there are certain things that you can think about in that regard. But to me, Sarg talked about it earlier too, it's about kind of breaking this back down and almost starting from scratch in some instances. And when you start from scratch, you don't get ROI on day 1. But what you get is this long-term vision and this long-term view that says, as we continue to iterate, ROI goes exponential beyond what the cost was to implement. But I think you have to be willing to say that you're not getting it back in 3 months. It's not moving that quick. And I think that's, to me, where that question comes, is there a great amount of potential return? Yes. But also that, I think, plays into how do you look at that cost? Is it truly you want to implement to reduce FTEs? Is it that you want to implement to prevent further hiring? Both of those have different timetables, right? If I'm preventing further hiring, the idea says that ROI continues to build and grow and grow and grow and grow as the company continues to expand. If I'm saying I want my ROI from cost cutting, well, as we've seen, especially in my space over the last year, the amount of layoffs and things like that, those are quick term fixes, but then very quickly it seems like they start to hire back, or they start to do this. And so I feel like the adoption here is much more of a longer term as you grow. And I think that's truly how you get the benefit out of the technology. It's not just can I make my money back in the first year? And I think to me, that's how we measure success here, is how does it allow the company to continue to grow, not how did it quickly turn and save me $1.
Thank you so much. We are unfortunately out of time. As I mentioned, any questions that haven't been addressed live, we'll address via email. Speakers from both Raft and Scarborough will be on stage at TPM Tech in Long Beach, March 2 through 5. So we hope that you will join us and continue this conversation. Thanks again for joining us. Raft, thank you so much for partnering with us today on this content. The webcast will be available on demand within 24 to 48 hours. You'll receive an email reminder about that. For more information related to today's webcast, including where you can leave us that evaluation, please visit the resource links or answer the poll that just popped up. Thanks again for attending Making AI Count, Real-World Answers for Global Logistics, presented by Journal of Commerce by S&P Global. Many thanks to Nassar and Adam for an outstanding discussion. I'm Alessandra Barrett. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.